Hello, my name is Mike Sawyer. I'm the author of Finding Our True Political Center through the Coming Revolution in Voting. Today I want to talk about how the simple math tells why polarized candidates should always win. It's simple enough for a fifth grader to understand, yet so obscure as to elude our finest scholars. Let's just use the average candidate as our baseline. Most of us know how to figure an average, or at least grasp what the concept means. We all know a candidate must do better than average to win. We have no reason to question that, or do we? For example, consider a race with 10 candidates and 100 voters. We expect an average candidate to receive 10 votes, or 10% of the votes, in a plurality election. Here's what we see in a plurality election, but does this really tell us all we need to know about the candidate? Ranked choice ballots can tell us a lot more about the candidates. As a thought experiment, imagine that all I can see is the plurality ballot results while you can see all rankings. Will we all see the same thing? Here's what we might expect. For this thought experiment, all voters rank all 10 candidates from 1 for most favorable to 10 for most unfavorable. I call this profile indistinguishable, meaning the candidate has not distinguished himself or herself from the rest of the field. We also see how it is balanced with favorable votes offset by unfavorable votes. I would call this profile the people pleaser, a candidate who has broad appeal, offering something to both sides. This too is balanced with favorable rankings offset by unfavorable rankings. By trying to represent all his constituents, fewer people will love him and fewer will hate him, but he's still an average candidate. But this is what I see. He gets little or no support in a plurality election. A polarized profile results when a candidate receives lots of first and last place votes with few in the middle. Voters either love him or hate him. This is still balanced, and he is still an average candidate, loved or hated equally. The most effective strategy for a polarized candidate is to build on the hate side, and the love side will fall in place. Degrade your opponent so you will look better by comparison. But this is what I see. We just elected the most hated candidate in a plurality of election, who by your measure was no better than average. When you're average, about half the field should be better than you and half should be worse. So the simple reason why polarized candidates should always win is because 50% is greater than 10%. Simply stated, indistinguishable candidates' rankings get spread across 10 ranks with an average of 10%. Polarized candidates are almost exclusively ranked first or last, averaging 50%. So, why should polarized candidates win? 50% is greater than 10%. But wait, he doesn't even have to be average. With 10 candidates, he could easily win with just 20% or 30%, while 70 or 80% dislike him more than any other candidate. Now, will ranked choice voting fix this? The entrance runoff, which is the most popular form of ranked choice voting today, solves several problems and levels the playing field between extremists by eliminating the spoiler effect. But it fails to level the playing field between centrist and extremist. Like plurality voting, it focuses on the first place votes. This algorithm successively eliminates the candidate with the fewest first place votes. Let's see how this compares. Any candidate fitting the people pleaser profile, as shown in the upper right, with no first place votes, will always be eliminated first, even before the indistinguishable candidate. Yet, he is probably the ideal candidate to represent all of his constituents. Fair Vote is aware of this problem and still promotes the instant runoff. Question is, why? The bad apple sort method, which is a variation of the Coombs method, successfully eliminates the candidate with the most last place votes until only the prize apple remains. This method will always eliminate the most polarized candidates first, eliminating in order number 4, number 3, and number 1, leaving only our ideal candidate number 2 as the winner. Considering the polarized state of American politics today, it's tempting. But in fact, it is equally unfair, favoring centrists just as much as the instant runoff favored extremists. Balance voting adds a point for each candidate's score for every first place ranking and subtracts a point for each last place ranking, and successively eliminates the candidate with the lowest score. Number 4, shown in lower right, gets eliminated first with a score of -60. All the rest are equal, having a score of 0 or average. Note, we are considering these profiles independently and not as a group. Balance voting seems to be pretty fair, but in my opinion, there is a better choice. Consensus voting is a variation of Buckland voting, and Buckley voting was used in some jurisdiction almost 100 years ago. The way Buckland voting works is any candidate who has a majority of first place votes, that is more than 50%, he or she is the winner. If not, we add second place votes to the totals to see if anyone exceeds 50% of first plus second place votes, and so on until someone reaches a majority. After that, after adding the first 5 places, candidates 1, 2, and 3 are all tied at 50%. And by the way, in a real election, barring exact ties or incomplete ballots, I would guess 90% of the time the winner would be determined by the third choice, and 99% of the time by the fourth. And of course, it could never exceed 5. As we can see, a single extra vote for any of these would have pushed one over the top. In fact, had that extra vote gone to candidate 3, it would have meant a quite polarized public and a divided country. We'll see shortly how consensus voting answers this problem. This is not an elimination style of voting, so candidate 4 is still in the race. After adding the 6th place, candidate 3 still sits at 50%. Candidate 1 has 60%, and candidate 2 is a winner with 70%. Candidate 4 was a clear loser, but had that 80% block of votes landed in the 6th place instead of last place, he would have been a clear winner. Consensus voting. The only change from Buckland's original algorithm is to raise the consensus from 50% to 60%. Why is it important to do this? Consensus voting doesn't mean there can't be close elections. Imagine that 2 candidates are virtually tied at 65% of the vote, but candidate A has 1 more vote than candidate B. B's supporters have legitimate cause to demand a recount, but they don't have the public support for a rebellion. Their problem is that while 65% of the voters like their candidate, 30% of these supported both candidates and are just as happy with A. That leaves only 35% who actually prefer B to A. Consensus voting, the great arbitrator. Unlike many winner-take-all voting methods, consensus voting is like a negotiation between you and all the other voters through an arbitrator who can help you find the candidate most acceptable to the group. Now, negotiating with the masses is an otherwise impossible task. What we do instead is organize into groups from political parties to protest marches. This often means you have a single interest in common with the group, but must concede to all other interests as the price of admission. We can only win at the expense of our own individuality. We see this even with a few hundred legislators in Congress who have little latitude to follow their own conscience. Consensus voting is an efficient arbitrator. We often see negotiations that seemingly go on forever, only to end in a stalemate. The inherent flaw in face-to-face negotiations is that to maximize your bargaining position, you must hide what's most important to you, while figuring out what's most important to your opponent. If you reveal what's most important too early, its price goes up. This is a classic game theory problem. Consensus voting skips the cat and mouse games, bringing about a faster resolution. In fact, it does it instantaneously. Just look at how the Build Back Better bill negotiations dragged on with no solution. Manchin and Sinema did such a good job of hiding what they really wanted that all of us are still in the dark. From an agreed list of options, every legislator prioritizes the list from best to worst. The ballot, this makes a ballot of sorts, and the algorithm solves it. Actually, the steps of negotiation are pretty simple. Negotiations require that each party be willing to make some concession to each other. Number one, any candidate who receives more than 60% of the first place votes wins. If not, first and second place votes are added together, and if any candidate receives votes from more than 60% of the voters, the candidate with the most place wins. If not, we continue adding places until someone reaches the 60% consensus. You may have noticed that this step-by-step procedure amounts to building an approval pod, or in other words, a list of top candidates equal in value. So why not just use approval voting? And how many would you put in your approval pod? The more you approve, the better chance you have of picking a winner. But each one you add lowers your standards. That is, it reduces the average value of the candidates in the pod. Quite a dilemma. So here's why. Consensus voting halts the building process when there is just enough to name a winner. Just as you would quit offering more concessions after an agreement has been reached in a face-to-face negotiation. Unlike approval voting, you don't have to worry about casting a vote for any lower ranked choices than were needed to reach an agreement. In other words, this algorithm generates a perfect shortlist. Consensus voting. Unknown, untested, and untried. I probably could have come up with a better slogan, but sometimes it's just best to stick with the truth. And the truth is, it's a game theory problem. It can't be reduced to a simple formula or run through computer simulation. To do either of those things, you would first have to predict human behavior, and that's what we're kind of trying to figure out. The best any of us can do is to look at a model and ask, How does that motivate me? So I want you to just kick it around a little with your friends and see what you think.